Hello world, it's Lee Kelson coming to you live from the Gold Coast on behalf of Fire Tech Connect, and I am joined by founder, funder and frustrated futurist and friend coming to you live from Stockholm in Sweden, Nicklas Bergman.
Morning.
Nicklas, welcome.
Morning, how are you?
Afternoon, I'm well. How are you?
Quite good now, quite good.
Quite good now. So we've just been talking offline. You've been recovering 3 weeks. I think you've had COVID-19. So you're officially a COVID-19 survivor.
Well, we should put it in context. Survivor is kind of a harsh word for me, but I mean, we should all think about the people that are really struggling with this. But I mean, to be honest, I had 2 weeks roughly with quite severe respiratory challenges, not being hospitalized, but still being at home in touch with the medical staff. And it's been challenging. So it's nothing I recommend. And actually, to be honest, it's when you talk about herd immunity, and a month ago or a month and a half ago, when friends said, my wife said, oh, it would be good to get it just so you have it over with. But I'm not so sure right now, actually. It's nothing I recommend, definitely. It was tough.
So what was the symptoms? How did it come on? Do you know how you contracted it?
Not really, no. I mean, although the media in the world are saying it differently, Sweden is more or less shut down as well. People are still working from home. Ground and middle schools are open. High schools, the universities are closed. Many of the large companies are closed or working from home. But so I don't really know. But I mean, the symptoms are really different for people. For me, it was severe headaches, fatigue, sort of a feverish feeling in my body to start with. And then just overnight, I had respiratory problems. And then it went on for roughly 2 weeks. No coughing, nothing like that, but just off and on, up and down, like a roller coaster ride of quite severe challenges in breathing. And then it's getting a bit easier and then coming back. And I mean, maybe you can hear it now. I have to take deep breaths every once in a while. I feel fine now. I've been out and about for the last week and a half or something, but it will take some time to fully recover to get my lung function back again. So I mean, not overdoing it, because there's a lot of people that has greater challenges, but from time to time it was a bit scary, actually.
Yeah. And so for people that don't know, you obviously do a lot of traveling. You've written 2 books now.
I usually travel a lot.
So the first book was Navigating the Tech Storm. Second book is Surviving the Tech Storm. And I think the subtitle is Surviving, is it in Uncertain Times, strategy for uncertain times?
Yes, something like that. I always tend to forget what it is myself, but it's, I mean, the basic notion is in times of great uncertainty, and we have all these technologies approaching from all distances, from all different ways, and how do we cope with that technological uncertainty, and how do we make that into some sound strategic advice that we can use to fend off the competition or stay ahead of the competition, and how do we see through the hype of everything that is happening. And that's the frustrated part of me being some kind of a futurologist. That frustrating part is that it's so much hype around technology today, and there's so much thought leadership, and I really despise that word, but there's so much of all these things people thinking, and I'm just trying to boil it down to something that is useful for any company in a strategic situation.
So, I mean, we want to talk about that and get to sort of what does it look like after this lockdown, this global lockdown, and this unprecedented disruption to the global economy, and particularly focused on the European economy and where you see that. But just on the COVID-19 thing, So we've sent a bit of press around regarding Sweden. Obviously, you know, I've spent a lot of time, lived in Sweden, so I know Sweden relatively well. And you know, you're sort of, you're different cats, if you know what I mean. You like doing your own thing, right? I mean that in the kindest possible way.
Yeah, saying it while laughing, right? Cool.
That's right.
I think one good thing for Sweden coming out of this is that people will stop thinking that we're Switzerland and the opposite, because that's how it is. Oh, I love your cheese and the Alps and all that, and the chocolate.
I always think of boiled potatoes and sill, pickled fish.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm from the pickled herring part of Sweden, and I think I'm the only one that don't eat it. So I get it. Now it's interesting. I mean, to be honest, I think in reality, it's not that different from other countries. We don't have complete lockdown, but I mean, for me, I haven't been in Stockholm. I live 15 minutes outside of Stockholm. I haven't been in Stockholm for the last month, 5 weeks. For the 2 weeks plus when I was not feeling well, I didn't leave our yard. I mean, I stayed at home, outside in the garden, but not much more than that. I didn't go to the grocery store, nothing like that, of course. So it's not a lockdown by the rule of law, but it's a lockdown by the rule of social construct, more or less. That said, people are working. I got friends that are working, going to the office, but they're the only ones being in the office. They do that because they feel that is better for them. The travel in Sweden is down 95%. Easter is one of the big weekends, holidays, when people travel to the mountains to go skiing or to the summer houses. And that was down more than 95%. So don't trust anything you see in the media, because it's we had a sort of a setback this weekend where the weather was nice and people felt a bit more relaxed. A lot of people were out in the bars, not social distancing as they were supposed to. So yesterday, the Prime Minister and the head of the health authority just came down on that and said, listen, this is not how we should do this. Meaning that it's a way of mutual trust between the authorities and the population, that, okay, we kindly ask you to do it in this way, and people usually comply with that. So it is a bit different. We have a bit of a different strategy, but in reality, it's not that different.
So a lot of people are comparing. So, sorry, go on.
No, please.
I was just saying, a lot of people are comparing countries with countries, and I know that you have sort of a bit of a view on that. I think you've had a couple of Twitter stashes with a few people making comparisons. It's very difficult when people aren't, the regimes of testing and isolation and the policies that are being implemented are very different. It's hard to compare apples with apples.
And I mean, I don't want to be an armchair epidemiologist, but definitely not, because I think there's so many people having layman ideas and theories about this, then I think that people should leave that to the professionals. But I just find it a bit weird to compare countries by country, because we do the testing one way in Sweden, you do the testing another way in another country. I think doing the statistics, checking the data, following the data is very relevant for Sweden, because we can see the trends, see what's happening in different parts of Sweden. If we have roughly the same ways of doing the testing, of getting the data in roughly the same way in Sweden, then it's really useful. But comparing Sweden to Australia, or Sweden to any other country, even comparing Sweden to Norway or Denmark, that is a challenge. I mean, we had the refugee crisis in Europe a couple of years ago, meaning that Sweden has a lot more refugees from Africa and the Middle East than our neighboring countries, meaning that it's different demographics. Just one thing that people don't understand, the language. meaning that when you need to communicate how to handle this COVID-19 outbreak, people are reacting in different ways based on their understanding of the culture, the understanding of the language, for example. So I think it's really, really hard to compare countries in this case. I think it will take a year or two before we can do that. I saw one analysis in, was it the Financial Times or New York Times, where they compared death rates this year with the average death rates of the last couple of years. That is then we're getting somewhere where you actually can compare how different countries are dealing with this. But it's challenging. And I mean, for me, it's just, it's not a competition on who's doing the best job. I think it's just making sure that the first responders, the medical staff are being well taken care of, that we keep the pressure down on the emergency units and all that. So, but it's interesting that Sweden is used as a political tool in any discussion anywhere around the world, from the White House to Australia or our neighboring countries, actually. So,
yeah, well, I suppose it's from Sweden's perspective. It's good that it's getting any recognition because it's not usually on the.
It's ABBA, it's Björn Borg, it's Spotify, right. It's Avicii, rest in peace, and it's COVID-19. I don't know if that's a good. Actually.
That's a good thing, yeah. So obviously we're talking about the, we're talking about the crisis of the health crisis, but the economic crisis, that's something that, everybody's really sort of trying to get their head around that. And, I've been watching closely, and I know you're a keen follower of the US politics and our friend Donald Trump.
I wouldn't say keen, but yeah.
But let's put Trump aside for the moment. The Europe economy, obviously you've just come out of Brexit. We see that Germany's now starting to open up. We've seen the devastating effects and impact that it's had in places like Italy and Spain. What's obviously you're very close to the European Innovation Council. Is that right? The group that you advise and work with. So you've got sort of an ear to the ground there. What's the inside goss? Can you give us sort of an inside feel as to what's happening from an economic perspective? Are we expecting a V-shaped sort of recovery where we, fall and then come out of it really quickly? Are we looking at a U-shape where it's going to take a little bit more time? Or are we going to move into this sort of long-term L-shaped depressionary type period in your view?
I don't know. Next question, please.
Okay, well,
just jokes aside, I think there was this guy on Twitter saying, I would love to see someone in the podcast using a different letter than V-shaped, U-shaped, or L-shaped. So I'm going to go for the Q-shaped, and then you can just start thinking about what the fuck is that. No, I mean, really, I think on the one side that we see, and I must say I've actually finally, after a long struggle, passed the macroeconomics exams that I did in business school, but I'm not the expert here either. So, but what's interesting is that we had kind of a sound economy when this hit us, meaning that there are possibilities for a quite quick recovery. Yes. On the other side, it is a struggle. We've had some economies have been struggling with high deficits before this. Italy, for example, the US is amazingly large deficits. But what I think maybe what I could share a bit is that we will see a change of behavior, I think. I mean, I see examples of companies realizing that, well, maybe we don't need all these fancy offices. Maybe I don't need to live in central Stockholm or central London. I could live outside, commute 2 days a week and work from home 3 days a week. Why should I pay my lawyers vast amount of money, like really
Yeah.
horrible high fees just that they could have these fancy offices, when I realized that they'd be more productive when they work from home. I talked to a friend yesterday. He's on the management team of one of the largest Swedish transportation companies. They do subways and trains and that. And their take on this is that the commute to and within Stockholm, it's going to recover, but they will probably see up to 10% drop when things go back to normal, because people will work from home a bit more, because now suddenly we have the Zoom, we have the setup, we have our home offices.
But we always had that. We always had that.
We've always had that, but now suddenly, given this, people realize that this is actually quite a good alternative, at least for one or a couple of days a week, meaning that I can be home, be more productive. I take the meetings on Wednesdays and Thursdays. I stay home Mondays or Tuesdays, whatever. And so I think we will see a change, and that goes for working from home, that goes with travel, any different part of how you run your companies and do your work. I think we're going to see a change based on the fact that we have a new normal. Exactly what that is, I don't really know. Of course, we're going to do less flying out of different reasons in the near future, but also continuing from that, I think that we'll see a change in behavior that has been ongoing for quite some time, both on a personal level and on a company level. It's been ongoing, but with this, where we've been forced into a new reality, I think some of these things will stick. And that also goes for companies, where you have companies that have been very digital, very agile when it comes to embracing new technologies. Companies that are doing quite well now still. And then you have companies, incumbents, that have been working towards a digital strategy, that have been sort of implementing it, and now they're being forced to do that a lot quicker. And maybe they are making it through this crisis as well. And then you have the companies that haven't really catched on, that haven't really understood how to deal with a digital perspective. They've been, their sales have been like shrinking year over year, coming into a situation now, it could be in retail or media, whatever it is, but coming into a situation now where they're faced with reality and they can't really step it up, meaning that they go bankrupt or restructure whatever they do. So it all depends on, I think, from a personal level, but also from a company level, what you've been doing before this, and how quick you can be in changing your behavior and the way you work and the way you make money.
Yeah, so I think I've seen two sort of schools of thought there. There's one that says, people sitting back, I've referenced the book "Who Moved My Cheese" quite a lot over the last month or so. It's very pertinent now in that there are people that are sitting there saying, I'm going to wait until things go back to normal. And then there are people that are innovating. I mean, from an entrepreneur and an innovative perspective, this is one of the most exciting times to be alive as an entrepreneur, as an innovator. That's my view, because I see the abundance of opportunity. And having, like you, we've discussed this, you and I collectively, I'm a little bit older than you, but we've lived through 4 of these sorts of crises and crises. And
for you, what was that? 1929, 1987? No, but that's
so I missed 1929 by a couple of years. No, I had the 87 crash, which was and then in Australia we had the airline strike, which shut down the airlines in Australia. 87, so I was in a small retail business at the time. Then of course we had the .com crash, which I was based out of New York at the time of that crash, and then we had the global financial crisis, and I was a year into launching my new company, and now this one. So I'd imagine they're the same 4 that you've been through.
Uh, well, sort of. Not the 87. That was when I was still in high school. We started a company. No, I was. We started a company in Eastern Europe right after the Berlin Wall came down. That was in 1991, and in '92 we had a real estate crash in Sweden, and there was quite a bit of a turmoil. There were extremely high. I think we had 500% interest rate in Sweden for a couple of weeks there. And
how high was the interest rate then?
500%. Just as a way from the central bank to make sure that the flow of capital still was working. So that was just a brief period of time, but we had a recession in 92, 93, 94 there. Then I got into startup investments around the millennia, and of course the dot-com crash. I started a company in tourism in 2006, 2007, and we were really struggling through the financial crisis. And so I've seen that, and then there are a lot of opportunities, and you always hear about these things now, that companies that get started in a crisis, how they bloom and how good that could be, and how you bootstrap your way into success, blah, blah, blah. And that's all good and fine. But apart from those few good examples, you have tons of examples of companies that are not making it, of course. But I mean, there's times of these, they really test your creativity and your stamina and how you can go forward with things. What I find interesting, though, is also people that have, especially in the startup world, a lot of people in Silicon Valley have all these amazing ideas on how to run a company through a crisis, and then you realize that they got out of school in 2009.
Yeah.
So I think you should listen, not necessarily listen to you or me, but listen to people that have been through this. I made a short graph showing that if you should take the advice from your VCs. If they were around in 2000, yes. If they were around in 2008, probably. If they got started after 2008, I don't think you should listen too much about how to handle a crisis, because they've been, and a lot of people in startups, a lot of people in investing in venture capital and in finance, they got started after 2008, meaning that they've lived through one of the longest boom markets in the world ever in history. So you have to realize and understand that when you listen to people and take their advice. And with that said, not necessarily taking my advice or your advice, but in general, people that's seen it before.
Yeah, I think I've seen a lot of that as well. It's it's hard to know who to take advice from. I guess my comment about this is a time to really be innovating is sort of, it's that old expression that don't let a good crisis go to waste. And I think the other one is necessity is the motherhood of invention. The fact that, as you say, I think particularly in Australia, there's been complacency around our innovation agenda, both particularly from a federal government perspective. And all of a sudden now, like you mentioned, we've seen steady growth in, adoption of video conferencing, and we've seen steady growth in e-learning, and we've seen the remote working sort of phenomenon starting to sort of spread. But it's just been what I would say is sort of fairly moderate growth. And I have this view, and I'm interested to know what your perspective on this is, but I sort of have this view that in 40 or 50 years' time, when economists look back at this period, they're going to see a spike on these charts of the adoption and acceleration. And, the question is, what happened there? Why did all of a sudden Zoom go from 10 million active users a month to 200 million? And then, it begs the question around what happens to some of these infrastructure projects where we've got, stranded assets potentially that aren't going to be used. Like you say, the freeways so we've got centralized working. We're pushing people into these cities to operate. Some people believe it's just going to all go back to normal and it'll be business as usual. And some people say that, like to your point, behavior will change. I think it's going to be interesting to see. No one can really tell how that's going to unfold, but it seems to me the genie is out of the bottle on some of these things. And it's going to be very difficult to take a significant commercial lease off your balance, off your P&L now, and then put it back on in 6 months' time.
No, of course. And for me, that it is fascinating. One short comment there on infrastructure. There was a canal built in Sweden in the early 19th century. It took 2 years to build it, and it cost 10 billion euros to build it. And I mean, Sweden in the early 19th century probably had a GDP that was less than 10 billion a year. So it was an amazing job. I mean, so much resources put into this just to make sure that we had a safe passageway through Sweden. We didn't have to go close to Germany or the Russians or whatever it was. And then they were finished in 1832, and it was going to be the transportation network of southern Sweden. And then it just took a couple of decades, and the railways came. So this turned into a very expensive tourist attraction in a time where we didn't have any tourists. So I mean, so these things, but these things are happening, and then the infrastructure, that is interesting. We talk in Sweden about building a high-speed rail network, and that's tens of billions of euros, like somewhere between 25 and 40 billion euros to build that, which is a lot of money. And there's been a discussion going on if we should do it, how we should do it, etc., and how we should finance it. And of course, that will come up again. I haven't really thought about that, but of course, that will come up again, given the fact that we might be traveling less. Video conferences is gaining momentum. So our change in behavior will, of course, also affect the infrastructure projects that we are looking at. Also, real estate, as you say, real estate in the time of crisis is usually a good bet on the stock market, for example. I've thought about that myself, and now realize that, I mean, even the very stable real estate companies will see a change of need from their customers. I mean, when it comes to retail, when it comes to office leases, and I don't really know how that will pan out, actually.
Yeah. And just on that, the travel side of it, obviously, you know, and the travel and the event side, where both you and I have been impacted in different respects. So from, you know, obviously our media business very much focused in Asia and doing tech conference coverage, and that business has just completely evaporated. And from your perspective, you know, you spend a lot of time, a lot of your time, a majority of your time traveling around the world. And, you know, we've sort of followed you around to all corners of the globe to do these types of speaking events. I mean, what do you see the long-term impact? I mean, is that going to come back, that event business? And, you know, what do you think that looks like?
Again, I mean, it's guesstimates. No one really knows, but I think that people will still, there's a need for meeting up, definitely. People will want to meet. I think it also differs what kind of events it is. I think an event where you, the last, I mean, as I say, I do the occasional keynotes, but of course I also travel in my real job, my day job, so to speak. But if you take the last event I did was in Dublin, beginning of March. And then I flew in and everyone else were gathering in Dublin, and then people coming from Dublin and the surrounding areas there, which is sort of a safe thing. Then I was the risk when it comes to COVID-19. Other events that are not happening now and will definitely not happen in the foreseeable future are events where you fly in the speaker somewhere and then you fly in people from all over the world, because that is not happening. Because that's, of course, that's a huge risk. That's with the Olympics, for example, where you have people flying in from all over the world. So, of course, it also differs what kind of events it is. But same thing there. I think people are appreciating the virtual events. I think people are seeing the benefit of that, but I also see and hear from people that they sort of lack the these chance encounters, serendipity of a physical event where you meet with people you wouldn't meet with otherwise, etc. And I think that is, again, things will change, but I definitely see that we will get back in actually meeting face to face, physical at events, networking, whatever it is.
Yeah. All right, Nicklas, thanks very much for talking with us today. We're going to have a lot more chats with you in the near future because we've got nothing else to do but to sit here and Zoom each other.
That's sort of the worst reason to do this, but still, okay.
Okay. All right, mate. Thanks for talking with us today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, cool. Take care.
Okay, mate. Ciao. Bye.
Bye-bye.